user-friendly. Also in August, 360-degree video making, which is new. This is a new class. The member orientation, which is the first and third Saturday of each month. That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And then Edit Suite certifications, which is the second and fourth Saturday of the month. And those are free. And by the way, all of this stuff, if you can't afford it,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You can come do it anyways. They have
suggested donation.
They usually have a $25 suggested donation. I'm sure the Silent Movie Summer Camp, there's some.
Yeah, probably.
There's a cost involved. I don't think that one's free. But everything else, get involved. Media Factory. Good stuff. Good stuff. So anyways, summer at the Media Factory. Hopefully we're on YouTube Live now. I'm not sure if we are or not. I'm going to post a link on Facebook once I see that we are on YouTube Live. But now it's time
to begin your story.
That's correct.
I'm excited.
July 16th, 1969.
Ooh,
the sun began to rise over the northeast coast of Florida on what would be a humid subtropical mid-July morning. The brown pelicans swooping over the dunes sensed the day was anything but typical. Parked tightly together on the sides of narrow roads to the beaches and causeways were thousands of cars and campers. The air carried the thrumming sound of helicopters ferrying visitors to Kennedy Space Center. Since, shortly after sunrise, all the roads to the Cape had become clogged with traffic. Nearly 1 million people were gathering under the harsh Florida sun to witness the departure of the first humans to attempt a landing on another world, the Earth's moon, 239,000 miles away. Should it be successful, the piloted lunar landing would culminate a decade of mounting anticipation. This is the story of Apollo 11.
Ooh, I like you got creative with that intro.
Yeah, thank you. I was stealing from you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if she
nicely done.
What do you think, Sheila? Is it good? She can't hear anything.
She can't hear. She's smiling and nodding.
She's smiling and nodding. She's waving.
Drinking her coconut water.
Yeah.
No,
okay.
Thumbs
all
up.
right. Thumbs up. All right. Woo. So we got some choices here on what we're going to cover. I'm going to assume that we're on YouTube Live, but
I think we made it there.
I sure hope so. I don't know if we did or not. But we're going to talk about. See, there's some happy stories, and then there's some not so happy stories, and then there's some stuff that could have happened but didn't happen, but maybe came close to happening, like some terrifying moments, some things that possibly could have happened. Oh, we are live.
Nice.
Yes.
Hello, YouTube.
Okay, hello, YouTube.
We've made it.
We made it. We made it. So we're going to talk about 5 terrifying moments during the Apollo 11 mission.
Interesting.
Okay, so the astronaut crew, they had some stuff that they had to figure out on this flight, and you know there was a lot of things that could go wrong.
Yeah, space flight, it's dangerous stuff.
In several interviews, Michael Collins, he likes to talk about how Apollo 11 and any of these flights was basically this very delicate daisy chain of events where if one thing didn't happen, they weren't going to land on the moon.
Yeah.
Actually, they might not even come back alive. I mean, this is not just like going around the corner for a
no, God.
carton of ice cream.
You're riding up on a bomb.
Right. So, number 1, missing the mark on touchdown amid multiple alarms. Now, you maybe did a little research on this.
You know, you gave me homework to do.
And you didn't do it.
I figured I could just read up on it today. And then I read up on this story. And this particular homework assignment is a little more complicated than I thought. So I'm going to go ahead and let you explain what that whole thing is. Because I don't think I understand it very well.
What was it going on this weekend, Kyle?
Just friends up, you know.
Oh,
Busy,
really?
Busy.
What else is happening?
Socializing.
You
and
were,
all that.
You're doing your own launch?
Oh, yeah.
Brewfest?
Sure.
It wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's okay.
We don't need to talk about my hobbies. Keep going.
It's not a hobby.
Keep it NASA related.
It's something that, okay, so after arriving in lunar orbit and later separating from the command module and beginning their landing sequence, you have to imagine that the LEM, or the Lunar Excursion Module, is basically just like, it does not look like a flying machine at all.
No.
I mean, it looks like one of those flying machines that maybe, you know, like Professor Pepper and his medicinal brew and his flying machine. You know, like that's the kind of thing that you would think of, like before Orville and Wilbur Wright like created manned, powered flight. Like this is like, one of those machines that it doesn't look like it should fly.
Yeah. But it's space, so there's no gravity. It's fine.
Well, correct. And in this situation, going down to the surface of the moon, the Lunar Excursion Module is built perfectly for this, right? And a lot of this getting down from lunar orbit to actually landing on the surface of the moon was based on computer programming. And it was based around all this code. Now, mind you, we have these amazing devices they call cellular smartphones, right? The amount of memory, let's put it this way. The amount of memory that goes into the average email, how much do you think it is?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it's like 78
megs.
megs.
Yeah.
And the amount of code in the entire LEM, 54 megs.
Yeah. So now I think, what is it equivalent? And I've heard this before, and maybe it's totally off base.
No, you're probably right.
The computer that landed the first men on the moon, first people on the moon, had the processing power of like the modern day graphing calculator.
Yeah. Less than that, actually. Less than that.
Which is crazy.
No, it totally is.
Yeah.
And at the time, this was when they finally started using different parallel circuits, microcircuits, and what's the transistors and things like that. Because the modern computer in the 1960s, it took up an entire room.
Yeah.
Right? And so now they have this, they got their computers are like the size of a laptop. Now, I mean, on my laptop, I'm doing stuff on my laptop right now. I'm posting a link. I'm posting a link on Facebook because we're on YouTube Live right now.
Nice.
But we're talking about the LEM.
Yeah.
And they're trying to land on another planet.
Yeah.
I would want to count on something that has a little bit more memory than that.
A little more memory. Oh, jeez.
And they this is what they had.
That's what they all had to work with.
So now they're starting to descend. And they get this alarm. 12:02. 12:02. and they're going really fast.
Yeah.
And they don't want to crash into the moon and die.
Not a lot of reaction time.
And by the way, here's the thing. If Apollo 11 doesn't land on the surface of the moon and they turn around and come back, that's okay.
That's fine.
They just got Apollo 12s coming up. Apollo 13. Oh, wait, Apollo 13. Yeah. Ooh, that didn't work out very well. So there's other opportunities. They could abort and come back. But they were bold, man. They had to be bold. They had to be bold because...
They have the right stuff.
They got to have the right stuff. And if it wasn't enough drama, the Eagles computer had been distracting them as they're going through this descent. So now Neil Armstrong, he starts using his noodle. He starts using his brain. And he realized that they were going to overshoot their original landing site.
Yeah.
The Sea of Tranquility was like this nice, flat desert area. Not a lot of craters. I mean, they did their research on where to land. And they were going to miss by... He looked, and he took an educated guess. He said, we're going to miss by about 3 miles.
Oof, big distance.
I mean, this is Neil Armstrong.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing. The guy had been a pilot since the age of 15. He had his pilot's license before he had his driver's license.
It's pretty impressive.
Right. I mean, and some of the missions that he flew, the Gemini mission when he hooked up to the Agena, and then they were tumbling end over end, and he saved that mission, and he piloted the Gemini back into the atmosphere with a stopwatch. Okay, and the other guy that he was with had passed out with a stopwatch and his retro rockets, and he still landed the mission.
Pretty good guy.
The guy knows what he's doing.
Knows his stuff.
So he knows his stuff. So now he's forget the flight plan. So now they have this modified flight plan. And now Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong are trying to figure this out by the seat of their pants.
Literally on the fly.
Literally on the fly.
Hurtling towards the
right.
moon.
And they're running out of fuel, right? So the radio communications, mission control, everybody's freaking out. What are we doing? What's happening? This is, it's terrifying, right? Computers overloaded. And so the way that it works, though, is they just have this display in front of them, and they have like 3 different sets of numbers that they can go with.
Yeah.
Which is your X, your Y, and your Z. And Buzz Aldrin's trying to give Neil Armstrong information because of the landing radar. But every time this alarm comes up, all those numbers, they disappear.
Interesting.
they disappear. So this alarm, basically what happened is that the computer was like locked up on infinity.
Huh.
And so now the computer's telling him where to land, and Neil Armstrong looks down and he's like, we're going to land in this area that's called Dead Man's Curve on the moon or something like that.
Sounds happy.
You're right. So it's a big crater. And as Neil Armstrong described, he said, from what I could see, it was this giant crater. We were about 500 feet above the surface of the moon. It was this huge crater with very steep slopes and boulders the size of Volkswagens.
Huh. Real flat, real happy.
Not
real
a place you want to land. And so now he did the calculation in his head, and they kept like yelling stuff in his ear. You know, you can hear it when they're trying to land. 60 seconds of fuel, which, by the way, was only an estimation.
Yeah.
And then they're about to land 30 seconds, and he found like the perfect place to land. And they said, okay, this is going to be Tranquility Base.
Yeah.
Sure. Right? So they finally land, and you'd think everything would chill out, right? Mm-hmm. No. They thought there might be an explosion.
Wow.
Because they had gone through so much fuel. So all this adrenaline is kind of like going through the astronauts who's carried out all this stuff, and now they're going through all these post-landing tasks, and this other problem was brewing. I bet you haven't heard of this one.
No, I haven't.
Diving on the edge of your seat.
Yeah.
So although there had been the shutdown, sensors were detecting a pressure buildup in the landing engine fuel line.
Uh-oh. That's bad.
This could mean only one thing. Ice had accumulated in the line, plugging it. And the backed up fuel vapor had nowhere to go and was getting heated up by the hot engine.
Oh, geez. So that's an explosion waiting to happen.
Right. And of course, like, everybody on Earth is like watching CBS News. You know,
Yeah.
Walter Krauss is like, oh boy, our man's on the surface of the moon. Two manly men. and NASA is freaking out because they got all these sensor readings. And, you know, of course, the news people keep calling NASA going like, oh, why won't they get out? Because they don't want to.
What are they waiting for?
They don't want to explode up and die.
Yeah.
And so this one guy from Grumman. So what happened is NASA is working with Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation. They're the company that oversaw the LEMS development. And they deemed the increase in pressure a hazard that may trigger a deadly explosion if not remedied. So they had to draw up plans to vent the system.
Interesting.
Because,
Yeah.
first of all, it's outer space.
Where no one's gone before, literally.
So in sunlight, it's like 300 degrees. Mm-hmm. But then when you're out of sunlight,
It's like negative
it's like
300
negative 300 degrees. So like the two biggest extremes that you could think of, right? So they had to figure this out. And so they had to draw up these plans. So this is a direct quote. We all felt the consequences of an explosion, even of the relatively small amount of fuel remaining in the short section of line. It was unpredictable and unacceptable. And this is the aerospace engineer, father of the lunar module, Thomas Kelly. And he wrote a book in 2001 called Moonlander. Before the instructions could be relayed to Armstrong and Aldrin, however, the ice plug thawed.
Wow.
The gas was released, and the problem remedied itself. Huh. They had no idea.
They had no idea.
And it was like, it could have, it could have just blown up.
Yeah.
Could have just blown up.
Instead of popped.
Right. So the next danger is now they're going to get out. Now,
Yeah.
we're scuba divers. Mm-hmm. Right. And just, just going into the water, it's a totally alien environment.
Yeah.
So thinking of like the partial pressures of the different gases, and they didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, and I don't care if the water touches me, but if you're out and
Yeah.
anything exposed,
Right,
God, I
exactly.
hope I have a hole in my spacesuit.
Right. So a dry suit, this is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
A dry suit has this special metal zipper. Are you listening to this, Sheila? Can you hear? Yeah, we're talking about dry suits here. Yeah, got it. Okay, good. So they have these special zippers that the dry suit actually keeps you
Dry.
right? But now they don't know what's going to happen. So even though the ground beneath Tranquility Base had the appearance of being free from any boulders that may have damaged the lunar module as it touched down, scientists couldn't be absolutely sure what was going to happen when they opened up
The door.
the LEM. They had no idea. What would happen if they stepped on the surface? What would happen? What if the stuff acted like quicksand? I mean, they didn't know how their suits would react. I mean, they tested it in a desert.
Yeah. How can you test it?
You don't know. They
don't
went
know.
underwater with this stuff. But what if the moon dust acted like quicksand? What about the moon dust covered jagged shards of rock that could injure them? So they didn't know anything. They had robotic missions, the Surveyor landers, that were designed to study the lunar surface to kind of like make some plans. But it wasn't until Armstrong finally kind of like got into this gray powder that NASA was sure the surface was safe for an EVA.
Not until he stuck his foot down.
This may be a kind of a minor point, but the lunar dust is no joke.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too, and so everyone moon dust, whatever, no big deal. They were covered in this stuff.
Yeah. Get
So
some new instruments.
what was going to happen when they inhaled this stuff?
Yeah.
What if there was bacteria, or the abrasive dust could be like worse than what's that?
Like asbestos?
Yeah, asbestos. There's no clue,
Yeah.
right? And so that was another concern. Speaking of that, alien infections.
Alien infection.
They had no clue. They had no clue.
It's wild to think about like what the speculation was when you know, of the unknown, when you have no idea what's coming your way.
But do we still know?
No, I guess we don't.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
We have no idea. So in 1969, there was some degree of trial and error. They had to be bold.
Yeah.
They had to be bold.
They were the first pioneering. The
And-
last great
Right.
final frontier.
Oh, actually, our ocean is still pretty much.
No, it's
we've
true.
explored more of our own atmosphere than we have of the ocean. So as they touched down on July 24th, they went straight into a
July
quarantine
21st.
facility.
Oh, you mean on land again?
24th,
Okay, yeah.
when they
Yeah.
landed
Here.
on the 24th on
Back
Earth.
here. Okay.
Yeah. They were transported into NASA Lunar Receiving Laboratory at Johnson Space Center, and they were at this larger quarantine facility until August 10th.
Wow.
So they were in quarantine for like weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Because they didn't know. There's a famous picture of the three of them in this and I actually got to see it. It's like a camper.
Yeah.
Right? It's this camper. Oh, yeah, there it is. And Athena's showing a picture of it. Great timing, Athena. And there's a picture of Nixon standing out front, and the three of them are like smiling at him, and they're like stuck in this thing.
Yeah.
We actually got a chance to see it when we went to the Smithsonian down in Washington, D.C. And but they didn't know. They had no idea if they had infections or what they could have brought back. And to be honest with you, do we really still know? We don't know.
No.
We don't know. We could be stuff. You know,
I feel like there's enough like Stephen King short stories or someone's like horror stories about
exactly.
Things riding back with
No
spaceships.
clue. No clue. The other thing was this. There was, and this is kind of our last like downer of well, no, it's not our last downer of a thing we're going to talk about. But there was a speech that was prepared for President Richard Nixon in the event that the mission was a failure.
I read that on our show the first time we talked about it.
And it was released to the public only 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it detailed the White House's response should the unthinkable have happened. Like Nixon was ready to give a speech.
Well, you have to be.
Yeah, in the event, and so here's the speech. In the event of moon disaster, and it was written by Bill Sapphire, and it was presented to H.R. Haldeman, who was one of Nixon's lackeys or whatever. I'll try and do it in a Nixon voice.
Do justice.
Yeah. Our fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That's pretty deep, man.
Pretty deep.
To rest in peace.
Yeah.
These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. Oh, but they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. Wow. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and understanding.
Good speech.
There you go.
Good opener.
Here's the end.
God.
For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind.
Wow. Someone wrote a good speech for Nixon.
Yeah. Seriously. This is
It's heavy stuff.
that's heavy duty stuff. But the reality is that that was a really good possibility.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's the same thing. It goes back to you have no idea what, you can't predict everything.
There was like a 50-50 shot that they were not going to survive. That basically was kind of how it broke out. And, I think Neil Armstrong had a conversation with a friend of his at a barbecue like weeks before the launch. And he's like, well, what do you think the chances are? He's like, 50-50.
Flip a coin. That's pretty much what
Yeah, that's it. We got a 50-50 shot. So we'll see how it goes. And Apollo 13 is evidence of what really, really could have gone wrong. Mm-hmm. So I think now's a good chance to take a little break. I did write a song this week.
Ooh, I'm ready to hear it.
And it's okay. But
it's a kind of Apollo themed.
It's Apollo theme. Basically what I did is I created different piano riffs, and it's piano in A minor for Apollo. So let's see what you think.
Let's put it on. Ooh, smooth.
Yeah, it's something. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to STEAM Lab, Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. And this week, it is Go! Apollo 11, 50-year anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. Touched people all over the world. Very fascinating stuff. So many stories, so many things to talk about.
Yeah, that was a good, spacey theme song.
It's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, I like it.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking you're in outer space, man. You're in outer space. And Michael Collins, he gave an amazing interview, and I have some of that stuff to talk about. But I think the story that I'm going to tell now is on the flip side a little bit. So humans, yes, they walked on the moon July 20th, 1969. And it is one of the most famous events in history. But the Apollo program saw all sorts of boundaries broken back on Earth.
Yeah.
So the boundary of the moon, broken. But other boundaries were broken. For example, I'm going to talk about Frances Poppy Northcutt. And she was the first woman to work in an operational support role in the Mission Control Center in Houston during the Apollo program.
Okay.
And if you've seen a picture of her back then, she's like a very, how do I put it? She's a very attractive, blonde woman. Very good. Yeah, there's Athena brought up a picture. She's stunning looking woman.
Okay.
And so that kind of makes things difficult when this is the 60s, people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She probably, when she first walked into Mission Control, a couple of these guys were like, hey, honey, I like my coffee with 2 sugars. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was,
Sexism rampant.
what can I say? We This is a time period.
We've talked about it too.
Oh, definitely. Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures on one episode. Sheila came in and gave us a little bit of synopsis.
Oh, yeah. And there were a lot of women in computer programming roles at the time.
Yeah.
And the 2016 movie Hidden Figures made that clear. And we did an entire episode around that.
Yeah.
And Northcutt started out in one of those roles.
Yeah.
At NASA, straight out of college in 1965. So she graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. Mm-hmm. She majored in math, which is not an uncommon field for women at the time, as many became math teachers. I mean, there you go. If you're a woman and you study mathematics back in the 1960s, you're going to be a math teacher.
Yeah.
God only knows you wouldn't actually get into math. But she had taken a celestial, how do I say that?
Celestial?
Sheila, how do you say that? Celestial,
that sounds right. Yeah.
Celestial mechanics course.
Okay.
And her title at NASA was computress. And she
is it gendered?
Yes, it was. And so she gives in an interview. This is a recent interview. She says, "What a weird title this is."
Yeah.
Not only do they think I'm a computer, but they think I'm a gendered computer. But she had a job, so she was happy to have a job, understanding the time period. So, there's a lot of context around that. People, you got to understand, and I don't mean to keep going back to that, but this is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And so to get to what the woman actually did, the engineer, scientist woman, not the computress, Northcutt did a lot of the number crunching for the Gemini programs, which was the foundation of the entire Apollo program.
Yeah.
And after she showed that she had, the brains and the guts and the boldness to do this work, she was promoted to a position on the technical staff a little over a year later. Mm-hmm. She was on the team that specialized in trans-Earth injection. So basically, do you understand what this means?
No.
So
trans-Earth injection?
So in order to get into orbit, you got to go pretty fast.
Yeah.
In order to stay in orbit, you have to be continuing to stay going fast. So like the International Space Station or the Space Shuttle. Do you know how fast?
Oh, I've heard this before, but I forget this.
17,500 miles an hour.
Quick. Okay.
So if you're going that fast and you're at the right altitude, you will be in Earth's orbit.
Continuously in free fall.
Continuously in free fall. You will stay in Earth's orbit, and that's hooray. Now, in order to go into what they call TLI, which is trans-lunar injection, you have to go upwards of 25,500 miles per hour.
Okay.
And we're trying to put this into numbers that are easily understood.
Yeah.
So she was on the team that specialized in, okay, we talked about going to another planet. Now we're going to do it.
Now we could actually
get
that person there.
The maneuvers that put the spacecraft on course to not only go to the moon, but to return to Earth from lunar orbit. So we're not just sending these chuckleheads to the moon, just drop them off and say,
we got to get it back.
We want them to come back. That's the point. So during missions, including Apollo 8, which was the first mission that they went to the moon and came back. That was the Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and some other guy. I can't remember his name.
Wow, a lot of pride.
Oh, no, I can't remember his name. Apollo 11, and she was also on the team that brought Apollo 13 back. So all these, numbheads. It's interesting, if you've ever seen the movie Apollo 13.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the movie where this, it's a bunch of guys. There's no women, of course. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this movie was made in 1994, so, it's all men. It's all white men. And they're all in this room, and we got to do a direct about face instead of going around the moon. And one of the younger engineers, who's a man, stands up and says, no, what we got to do is we have to use the moon as a slingshot because we can't use the command service module to fire up that engine to come back. We have to use the LEMS engine to fire up and come back around the moon. But the reality of it is that it was her.
Yeah.
There was a woman that did this.
Thanks, Hollywood.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Frances Northcutt. So she sat in a staff support room and the directors in the general mission control room and would call if they need. She was called on if they needed assistance, and she was the only woman in her job at the time though she notes that women served in many non-technical roles at NASA. So the men with whom she worked had to get used to a woman being in a room of engineers. And so she was part of a documentary called Chasing the Moon, which is a recent documentary. This is her direct quote. "I was sort of a trophy. I was blonde. I was young. I was thin. I wore the ladies' fashion clothes at the time." And archival footage goes on to show Northcutt being asked during an interview whether it's true that whenever she clocks in as a pretty girl wearing miniskirts, the mission grinds to a screeching halt. I mean, come on, dude.
Yeah. What are you doing?
I mean, I don't mean to go over this again, but this is all from her.
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's such a huge part of it. How can you not be harping on it?
And the thing is I think of Newton and what Newton said when, he talked about standing on the shoulders of giants. Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, they landed on the moon. That was just two guys that were just a part of. Were they brave? Yes. Were they bold? Yes. Could they get there on their own?
No.
They
needed a whole teams.
They couldn't, and they needed a pretty girl wearing miniskirts.
Yeah.
To actually program their booties home. To figure out the computer programming and to figure out the math to make it happen.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a room full of white dudes. We want some good social awareness on our show, so we have to talk about these things.
We gotta bring it up.
And I don't think that this is a story that's been talked about too much.
No, I've never heard of her.
Right.
And not that I'm a moon landing connoisseur, but I feel like I know, I know a little bit about it, but I never heard of her.
So she says in this interview at one point, she could tell she was being watched at work and heard colleagues talking about what could be seen on one of the camera channels in their internal system. Finally, at one point, I turned on that channel, and there was a camera that was just on me. What did she do when she saw that?
Flip it off. God, I hope so.
Yeah, she just said, okay, now I know that I'm working with a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
That even though they're engineers and my coworkers, to them, I'm just a pretty girl, and that's it. Well, some people who worked at NASA tried to get a glimpse of the action in the control room during the moon landing. Northcutt didn't go into work during that time, waiting until her shift came around. She was focused on the earthbound part of that mission, so her part came later. Some people wanted to say they were in the control room. I felt it was more important to be rested to do my job. If there are too many people around it, it can be a distraction.
Yeah. Like too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
She had a mission to do. She knew that her job was to bring them home. Didn't have to be there. And she used the media attention she got for a higher purpose. She said, "Oh, you want to give me this attention?" Well, of course I was being used.
Yeah.
My feeling was, you can play this both ways. She said this in the documentary. The mere fact that a lot of women found out for the first time that there was a woman in mission control was a very big deal. I thought it was important that people understand that women can do these jobs, going into science, going into technology, doing something that's not stereotypical. It's good for her.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, reflect on that time. She feels that while the cigar-smoking, male-dominated rooms of NASA in 1969 were something out of Mad Men, the sexism she faced was not as egregious as the abuse and harassment that has more recently sparked the Me Too movement. As she says, and I quote, "There was a lot of sexism, but less than what most women experience," she says. "The life and death situation for the astronauts meant you're very focused on what you're doing."
Yeah.
Obviously not if they're, putting cameras on her. She's kind of playing it up here.
Yeah.
Her political awakening was a process that started shortly after she started working for a company contracted by NASA. When she realized that her male colleagues were getting paid overtime and she wasn't, and she was reading articles about the women's rights movement, she saw a newspaper ad for the August 26, 1970 Women's Strike for Equality, and it was about a half an hour drive in downtown Houston. Took the day off to participate in the demonstration. And then Life magazine profiled her in its story about the protests. And she told the magazine that she didn't consider herself as one of the screamers in the women's liberation movement, but that she felt her work was such that there should be no room for gender bias. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
Math is math. Technology is technology. Engineering is engineering. If you write a computer program, it either works or it doesn't. There's no opportunity for anyone to be subjective.
Yeah.
Kind of national press attention made her even more of an activist. So it's almost like she just wanted to be an engineer.
Mm-hmm. And that was it.
But it made her into an activist.
Yeah.
And she still is. I became more conscious partly because of the attention I was getting as the first and only woman in my role in the Mission Control Center. It increased my awareness of how limited women's opportunities were. It was almost 1970. We're at the brink of going to the moon, and we still don't have more women. I should have been the 100th. Mm-hmm. In the early 1970s, she was part of a small group of politically active women who worked at the Space Center and began what would be a successful push to improve health benefits for single women. She says the contracting company that she worked for was progressive for the times and made some changes without a lot of active resistance. It's pretty cool, man. So she became part of this national women's rights activist, and after the Apollo program ended, she joined the Houston mayor's office as a woman's advocate for the city. So she just got right into politics.
Yeah,
and now she works as trying to push for gender equality in STEM and STEAM fields. Nice. And to her, it remains a battlefield. What's more surprising to Northcutt is how much media attention 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 is getting, considering the American space program has been sort of an afterthought in recent decades.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, we put a man on the moon 50 years ago, but how long has it been since we've replicated that?
And she says, I think we should go to the moon again.
Yeah.
It was a giant mistake to have stopped going. We didn't fly all the Apollo missions. We never explored different ways to orbit the moon. It's like exploring Earth's equator, never getting into the northern or southern latitudes. That would not represent a complete exploration.
Yeah.
And she's right. It didn't make any sense. And I know that there's a lot of people, just to kind of get on a different tangent here, that there was a lot of political protest, distrust in the government, and we have that today as well. But the space program was a bright spot in that environment, and still is. And to be honest with you, it's money that, I mean, people go, oh my God, it costs $1 billion to launch this space shuttle. Think of all the jobs that it creates.
Yeah.
The high-tech engineering jobs.
The photos of the control room. I mean, there's just like an army of people behind these things.
And that army of people have another army of people.
Yeah.
And that army of people have another army of
Someone's
people.
got to build the ship. That's
right.
That's
all.
People,
you see, that's all money that we're paying ourselves. You know, and I mean, instead of having, I don't want to get into this too much, but a military-industrial complex, a space exploration industrial complex, that would be pretty rad, and it would make sense because the space program. I mean, maybe that's why there's nostalgia for this great achievement.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I don't know what's coming up in the private sector, revitalizing. As soon as someone gets close, like Elon Musk, how much that pushes NASA to step up their game. We'll see.
But the problem is,
time will tell.
I think NASA wants to push things.
They just,
But that's
how much it'll push the government that funds NASA to step up their game.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. So let's take a quick break. And then I got plenty more Apollo 11 stories.
Exciting. You got some music?
Do you like that one?
I liked it.
I think that's a story
Learned
I
something
doubt many folks have heard. By the way, you're listening to 993 FM, WBTV LP in Burlington, streaming online at 993wbtv.org. And we are STEAM Lab, Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/STEAMLabVT. You can stream us live on YouTube right now. The amazing Athena is doing a killer job. I've had a chance to take a look at some of our live feed. Looks super good.
As always.
I'm Engineer Phil. It's Dr. Kyle. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with some more Apollo 11. Hello, Kyle.
Hello, Philip. Oh, is it? Are we?
Time for your information, Kyle. Kyle. Neil Armstrong carried with him a piece of wood from an airplane that belonged to the Wright brothers. The first recorded flight was achieved by the Wright brothers in 1903, 66 years before the first manned lunar mission. Thus, Neil Armstrong sought fit to take with him pieces of wood from the pioneering Wright plane as well.
Pretty significant timeline.
Kyle, for your information. Oh, I already talked about this. If Apollo 11 had failed, President Nixon had a speech ready. Oh, we talked about that.
Well planned out, as always.
Thank you. For your information, Kyle.
Silence.
Armstrong and Aldrin spent almost a full day on the moon's surface. The period spent outside the probe while the moon is known as extravehicular activity, or EVA, a term that covers an astronaut activity performed beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Due to the many experiments the astronauts conducted on the moon, as well as placement of the many instruments involved, the total EVA lasted 21 hours and 36 minutes, Kyle!
That was a long one.
And that's for your information, Kyle!
Wow. Whew. Take a deep breath. That was a lot.
I love Athena's picture. This is Beaker. Athena, you're a jewel. I must tell you that there are many, much like the Apollo program that has so many team members, we have amazing team members around here.
We do.
At the Media Factory.
It's not just these beautiful faces on the camera or voices over the radio.
Well, so Athena does have a really good show of the Throat of the Loon. It's on Fridays. I got a promo here thing. I got to pull it up later.
Okay.
But she does an outstanding job for our show in particular, and
she also just got a big promotion at the station here.
Good for her.
So congratulations. Yeah, well deserved.
Well deserved. Doing an excellent job.
And she won't forget about
the little people.
Our little show here on Steam Lab.
Right.
Sunday nights.
The little people. So we talked about that. We talked about this. I'm going through my list of things.
Nice checklist going.
Oh, so here's some quick facts. Some facts about the moon landing. The astronauts left pictures of human beings and the recordings of many languages on the moon's surface.
Interesting.
Just a record, right? And they left several items on the surface of the moon, including a picture of, so they had audio recordings, medallions bearing names of the 3 astronauts who perished in Apollo 1 on the launch pad, and the 2 cosmonauts who perished in a similar accident. People really think that this rivalry between the Soviet Union and the American astronauts, it's not so much. They had mutual respect for each other.
Yeah.
The cosmonauts watched the lunar landing, and they were cheering these guys on for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they were bummed that it wasn't them, but
I would say there's mutual respect among the astronauts and cosmonauts, but I would say maybe not so
with the government
among the governments that were funding the whole thing. But that's a whole nother topic.
Oh, let's not get into that. So when this is a funny story.
Yeah.
So when the astronauts returned, when they returned, they had to declare.
Did they really declare their custom?
Yeah.
Did you bring back any moon rocks worth over $10,000?
So Buzz Aldrin, he tweeted a travel voucher. He did in 2015. If you look it up, you'll find it. And it outlined the nature of expenses incurred from his trip out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And just like somebody would take a trip to like Fiji or something.
I just spent $30,000 in gas.
They were required. He revealed that the astronauts were required to sign customs forms upon their return to Earth.
Wow.
Upon they declared.
Talk about bureaucracy.
I know, it's so funny. And Sheila's out there going like, what?
God.
They had to declare that they were carrying moon rocks and moon dust samples. That's just bananas to me.
Wow.
It's a true story though, man.
That's in case they snuck any booze back from the moon.
Right.
Apparently.
Yeah. So the exact phrase uttered by Armstrong.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm,
Come on,
so.
what is it?
Houston.
What?
We have a problem. No, I'm just kidding.
What?
This is one big step. I'm going to get it wrong. One small step for man,
Yep.
For one giant leap for mankind.
You got it. Okay.
Got it.
Yeah,
I got there.
Oh boy.
I definitely didn't look that up.
Okay.
I didn't.
Hang on.
That sounded sarcastic. But,
I'm gonna play it real quick.
I pulled it out of
I'm
my.
gonna play it. I'm
out
gonna
of my
play
head.
it. Are you ready?
Oh, yep.
Okay. Here we go.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So he says that's one small step for man, right? But that's grammatically incorrect. It should be that's one small step for a man. But so Armstrong actually claims that he said the A, right? That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And although many claim to not hear this subtle variation, there's linguists that have confirmed that Armstrong does in fact utter the leading to the quote, to most officially be presented with the articles in brackets. Now let's play it one more time. Let me see if you can actually hear.
Now that we've psychologically primed you.
Okay, let's see if you
hear
can.
that.
I'm going to look at Sheila. She can give us the thumbs up or not.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I don't hear it. Yeah, Sheila's giving a thumbs
It like
down.
stutters after 4.
No.
I don't know.
I don't hear it.
I don't buy it.
Nope.
Sorry,
There's no,
Neil.
sorry, dude. You. It's a cool quote. I mean,
It's still cool.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It's pretty good. It's a good quote, man. I mean, that's awesome. Like the landing. How many people do you think actually watched it?
How many people had television sets back in '69?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, it didn't matter. I mean,
know.
people were watching it in Central
Yeah,
Park.
oh,
People
God.
were watching it in public.
How do you even track that number?
They estimated it.
What was it?
600 million people. The record-breaking event was seen by millions of viewers around the planet. In the days preceding the mission, media outlets all over spoke extensively of the mission, leading to widespread public anticipation. There was a great amount of media coverage of the event in the United States. It is estimated that over 53 million families watched the mission on television. Global viewership was estimated to be more than 550 million viewers, a world record at the time.
Very cool.
I think we're going to just have to keep going on live stream here, man.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. I have more to
Yeah.
talk about, too. I see you keep looking at your watch there. Do you got some news for us?
Do I? I think we need to take a music break first.
Okay, I got one more.
Okay.
Okay. Although there were 3 astronauts sent to the moon, only 2 of them actually stepped on it.
Yeah.
Right.
One stayed back,
That's right.
floated around, hoping his colleagues would return.
Yeah, that's right. and I'm going to talk about Michael Collins. He does a whole interview, and we'll talk about that.
Nice.
Many people who have knowledge of the Apollo mission believe that the probe carried only 2 astronauts. So a lot of people do, and I don't know why. I mean, because whatever. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, with Armstrong being more famous of the 2. While it is true that the module that landed on the moon carried the 2 astronauts, there were 3 in total when they left the Kennedy Space Center. And Michael Collins, he was actually the only human being to be absolutely and utterly alone.
Alone. Yeah.
Like truly alone.
Yeah, because he's drifting.
Yeah, he's just going around the moon. Like he is the only human being to truly ever be totally alone. And I think that Sheila and I can agree that there's moments when we'd both like to experience that. We have a pretty chaotic house sometimes. To be truly alone.
The face that says it all that the camera can't see.
That's right. To be truly alone. And you know what Michael Collins said? He said, when I was finally alone, I made myself a hot cup of coffee.
Nice. As one should.
And he was super happy about it. So we're coming up on the top of the hour. And I'll just say this much. We are sponsored, not sponsored, underwritten
Underwritten.
by Burlington
The correct
Telecom.
words.
Their Lifeline program. It promotes a digitally inclusive community which helps Burlington residents afford the internet tools they need to reach their full potential. You'll learn more at burlingtontelecom.com. So we're going to take a music break. But we're going to keep going with YouTube Live because I have way too many stories to talk
Yeah, I'm
about.
sure you got. I've seen the list.
We got plenty of stuff to discuss. So we're going to take a quick breaky break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about Apollo 11.
Okay.
was a hard cut.
Hard stop.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to STEAM Lab, Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. We are the Nerdvana of Geektopia. I'm your host, Engineer Phil, and across the way from me is Dr. Kyle.
Hello.
And we're talking about
Apollo 11.
Go, Apollo 11. Some amazing stories, some amazing tales, cool things to talk about here. And I know we got some news.
Do we?
Well, I have to find the music.
Maybe after the next break.
There's a possibility. How's Karen doing?
My mother.
Yeah,
She's
just say
listening.
hi.
Yeah.
What did you said?
She's shouting out some details and facts and stuff.
All right, I want to hear it. What do you got over
What?
there?
Come on. Geez, I don't even know. I haven't even cross-referenced this stuff.
It's your mother, you gotta.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Apparently, Collins was happy to be alone, and
He was,
Buzz
yes.
Aldrin mixed him a tape to listen to while he was drifting lonesome on his lonesome. And
He drifted.
played-
He made him a mixtape.
Yeah, apparently.
That's kind of rad. I wonder.
right. Buzz Aldrin, funny guy.
I wonder what. It does make me kind of wonder. Like,
Wonder what he put on there.
yeah, I mean, like some Johnny Cash or like.
Yeah, right. I don't know. It's a sad, lonely mixtape.
Yeah.
No, I feel like that would be right up Aldrin's alley. Who knows? Maybe someone will find it. Post it on Facebook.
All right. What else? What else? Other facts is.
I'm scrolling through. Let's see. There was another woman. There was one woman in the firing room named Joanne Morgan,
okay.
who was also involved, but I don't know much about it. Geez. The developer of the suits was Playtex. Fun fact.
Oh, because you could poop in it.
Yeah. And they were,
that's good,
they were
'cause,
freaking
hey.
out while Aldrin was doing kangaroo hops on the moon.
Really?
Because they thought that he was going to break the suit.
Wow. And honestly, they really tested the limits of those suits.
I'm sure they did. But it comes back to the fear of the unknown and things.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, they didn't know how it was going to go.
No.
They had no clue. They had no clue. Okay.
What else you got?
Well, let's see here. What else does Karen have?
That's everything I got.
That's it. That's all. That's all. Well, we can talk a little bit about Michael Collins' interview here.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the dark side of the moon.
He's a really fascinating. He's a really fascinating guy because the thing is that Michael Collins he's very humble. That's the way I would put it. All the interviews that I've seen with him, he's a very humble guy. He basically says, you know what? We're not heroes. He said this in an interview. The three of us went to the moon and came back successfully. That was a great success. Was that good? Was it terrific all the way around? Yeah. Yeah, but it depended on the white mice. That's what he says. So which were more important, the mice or the men? I came to the conclusion that the mice were more important. What does that mean? Let me explain. Astronauts are not heroes, he says in this interview. We knew what we were supposed to do, but that's what we've been hired to do. It was not above or beyond the call of duty. It was our duty, and we performed it. Right? And he considered, this is directly from him, what do you remember most about the mission and your confidence in its success? I consider a mission like that, a flight to and around the moon, back to Earth, as a long and very fragile daisy chain of events. And any of those, if it broke, screwed up the remainder of the chain.
Yeah.
What I remember is that it was a complicated trip, and he was amazed by the fact that all the equipment worked 100% to perfection. And as he discussed, he was amazed because he's accustomed to things breaking.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff breaks. I mean, I had to clean out our sink
Oh yeah.
to take the snake and get that going, man. You know, things break.
Yeah.
You know, that's just what happens. And machines that fly in the air, and God knows there were plenty of things that could have broken on the flight in this fragile daisy chain. Nothing broke. Everything worked as advertised. So the next question had to do with any secret terrors that he had harbored. That if the Eagle lunar module failed to launch Armstrong and Aldrin back from the moon's surface to Columbia, and then he would be returning to Earth without them.
Oh, alone. Harsh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he says clearly that was one of the obvious links in that daisy chain, and an extremely important link. We love to have duplicates and redundancies in all of our equipment, but it was not possible in the case of the Lunar Ascent Module. It's just one tiny little thrust chamber. If it didn't work, they were stuck forever on the surface of the moon. This was nothing that they ever discussed We just didn't talk about things like that. Of course, they were intelligent men. They knew exactly what their odds were. Likewise here, and yeah, that concerned him a lot. It would have been that guy who left them there on the moon to die. It would have been an awful, terrible national catastrophe.
Yeah, it's a rough roll.
But of course, the question comes up: would he have been? Was he disappointed that he didn't? I mean, he made it that far.
Yeah, they didn't get to go down.
But he didn't actually get to go on the moon. And of course, I did not have the best seat on Apollo 11. But I can say with complete honesty, I was absolutely delighted to have any seat on Apollo 11. It was a culmination of landings, and in the back of my mind, it was what John F. Kennedy had told us to do. We were going to do it. And my being able to be a part of it, even if it was just a small part, suited me just fine. So he's, like I said, super humble guy, and then there's a lot of jokes like lonely Michael Collins. He's the loneliest person in the universe during these hours, orbiting the dark side of the moon. Mm-hmm. And he said, you know what? I think that's just ridiculous. He couldn't understand. When we returned to Earth and we went through our debriefings, the whole focus of the press attention when it came to me wasn't I the loneliest person in the whole lonely space program in that lonely orbit behind the lonely moon, more lonely than any previously lonely people had ever been lonely? And he thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so thinking of the accomplishment, Michael Collins says, we all recognized that this was a huge accomplishment, but it got reinforced to us after the flight when we were privileged to go on an around-the-world tour. I was amazed. I thought we would get, well, you Americans finally did it. And instead, everywhere they went, people said, we did it. We did it, not you. We human beings left our home planet and went elsewhere. We did it.
It's pretty cool.
And he
pretty
thought,
cool collective
yeah,
attitude.
and he thought that was a wonderful reaction, and to me, a surprising one. And as I look back on it after 50 years, I try to think what other event has unified opinion worldwide. And there's no other examples.
No other examples.
Right.
Very cool.
So now interesting guy. He's an interesting guy. Michael Collins. He's not lonely Michael Collins. He's humble Michael Collins. Good dude. Interesting human being. And I think we're out of time for VCAM. But we're going to stay on YouTube Live, I think. We'll just keep going.
That's fine.
But
so thanks for watching.
yeah, VCAM.
We're broadcasting the Media Factory in Southern Berlin, Vermont.
What else can we talk about?
99.3 FM. We'll continue on the live stream, so keep watching.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we got to keep going.
Means you won't hear any commercial music.
No, but so I'm going to play another song right now, and then we're going to come back. I got plenty of other Apollo 11 stories.
Sweet.
And then we're just going to keep rolling here because
I like it.
I got too much information in my head. So we'll be right back.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to STEAM Lab. Science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. We are the Nerdvana of Geektopia. And this week,
All about Apollo.
go! Apollo 11, 50th anniversary of NASA's mission. And I'm going to tell a...
Ooh, I don't know what story's coming up.
Well,
Let's hear it. I'm interested.
It's reality,
Yeah?
okay? And I'm going to tell the story of Wernher von Braun.
Ooh.
And he led NASA's development of the Saturn V rocket. I mean, he was a huge proponent and a leader in NASA for many, many years. And he's the rocket guy. He's the scientist that took Apollo 11 to the moon. However, his Nazi record was not widely known until after his death.
Interesting.
He really kept a lid on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the guy was a Nazi. He was a German. He was a German scientist. And although he did some great things for America, and he was a very proud American, he loved living in Alabama. Mm-hmm. Where is it that they do that work? Yeah, Huntsville, Alabama. And he was the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. Mm-hmm. So 6 weeks before the historic December 1968 Apollo 8 mission to orbit the moon, Wernher von Braun received an unpleasant surprise. A West German court asked him to testify in the trial of 3 former SS men from the Militbau-Dora concentration camp, which had supplied slave labor for the production of the V-2 ballistic missiles. There's not a very happy tale here. But you know what? This is a story that must be told.
Yeah.
You know, like we told the story of this woman who's a computer programmer, and she was looked at in this light and this perception. We got to tell the truth about this other guy who's looked at as this hero, and he was in terms of his
work,
but maybe not so much in terms of his politics. And there's an argument to be made that von Braun had been a scientist. He was a pawn in war. However, he could have done more. Anyways, let's just tell the tale. Mm-hmm. So von Braun had been the technical director of that project and visited the Associated Metalwork factory dozens of times. Now he's the head of the center that managed the gigantic Saturn V moon rocket. Obviously, he was afraid the attendant publicity would damage his reputation and that of NASA. So he tried to beg off. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to go.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be involved in this. But in the end, he spoke to the judge in the court at the West German consulate in New Orleans on February 7th, 1969. So he put it off. Mm-hmm. He kept putting it off.
Yeah.
An excerpt from his press interview afterward appears near the beginning of Chasing the Moon Part 3, which is this documentary that I was talking about on PBS. Mm-hmm. He denied any personal responsibility and put as much distance as he could between his Peenemünde Rocket Development Center and the Metalwork complex. So he wanted to like put the past behind him, which
just shove it under the rug.
Yeah, I mean, which I don't blame him. I mean, you know, if I was a former Nazi, I guess I wouldn't want everybody to know about it. As a longtime press person, Ed Buckby notes in this documentary, von Braun had received few such inquiries. He and his employer, from 1945 to 1960, the United States Army had effectively neutralized most of the uncomfortable questions surrounding his former service for the Fuhrer, Adolf Hitler.
They're one of the scientists.
Yeah, well, right.
Yeah.
And the Soviets took, they took some Germans for their rocket program. I mean, basically, the space race, the rockets that were built for the Soviet Union and the rockets that were built for the United States were based on German engineering and scientists. I mean, that's what it's based on.
Yeah.
A lot of that work. So in autobiographical articles and press interviews, he stuck to the line that he was an apolitical scientist who wanted just to go into space. He only wanted to go into space. He built missiles used against Allied cities because it was his national duty in wartime. He admitted that he had been a part of the National Socialist Party. That's what he labeled it. Not going to say Nazi, of course.
No.
But labeled it nominal and necessary to protect his career in a totalitarian society. If he mentioned concentration camp labor, it was only obliquely, while assigning all blame to the SS. Which, okay, in fairness, like obviously he's a scientist, he's doing his work as a rocket guy. He wasn't walking around with like a pistol and, like the scary black SS uniform, and, he wasn't doing all that. But the fact remains he was still a Nazi. In fact, very little information about the camp story was available to the public, in part because the Army classified much of it. Come on, dude.
Yeah. Classic U.S. military move.
And I guess some of that's good. At the time, the public couldn't really digest that kind of information very well.
Yeah.
Probably still can't. The military did the same with von Braun's SS officer rank, because he was an SS officer, and the Nazi records of the more than 100 associates who had come to the United States with him. The one thing he was willing to talk about was his March 1944 Gestapo arrest. He allegedly made drunken remarks at a party about Germany's likely defeat and his preference for building a spaceship. It made him look like a victim of the Nazis rather than a perpetrator.
Interesting.
You like to tell that story.
Yeah. Try to spin it, swing it around.
Right. And von Braun died prematurely of cancer at age 65 in 1977. And thus missed the storm that broke out 7 years later, so 1984.
Yeah.
One of his closest associates, Arthur Rudolph, voluntarily went back to Germany in 1984 rather than contest a denaturalization hearing over his role as production manager in the underground plant. The Justice Department released records relating to Rudolph, von Braun, and the Mittelbrau Dora camp. Von Braun's SS membership first became widely known then. So 1984. It's just kind of, it's sad,
Yeah.
Although communist East Germany had tried to, in the 1960s, with little success in the West, to publicize it, thanks to the work of investigative journalists in the 1980s and scholars in the 1990s, everything about his Nazi record and those of his associates came out. Belatedly, many became aware of the deaths of thousands of prisoners at the V2 program and the potential implications of von Braun and a few key associates in those crimes. What do we know about his Nazi record? Here we go.
Yeah.
So he's born in 1912. Von Braun grew up in a very conservative, nationalist, aristocratic family, but became obsessed with space travel in his teens. So he, in that time period, he was driven by this dream to someday lead an expedition to the moon. He took the unusual course for a Prussian baron, and as he actually was, to pursue an engineering career. In late 1932, the German army offered to finance his doctoral dissertation if he worked in secret on liquid propellant rocketry. Shortly thereafter, Hitler became chancellor. Von Braun was a right-wing nationalist by upbringing, but seems to have taken little interest in Nazi ideology or anti-Semitism. So he really was a scientist, and he kind of like used, so if you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List, you know how Oskar Schindler, he's got like the factory, and he's like, at first in this movie and the actual man, he's using these Jewish people to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like von Braun did that. Only in Schindler's List, Oskar Schindler was like, wow,
This is bad.
this is horrible.
I need to get these people out of here.
This is really bad. So he makes the decision to like, I'm going to create a really safe camp, really safe environment for these people. And then at the end of the war, because Germany's not going to win this war, I'm going to make sure that they all survive.
Yeah.
And he was kind of a savior, along with a few other people, his wife included. Von Braun was kind of like, he was in the same boat, only he didn't do the last part. Right? He
The
didn't really
redeeming part, you mean?
Yeah. He didn't really care about the Nazis. it was about money. Money began flowing into the rearmament and eventually into the rocket program, and he became more enthusiastic about that regimen. In 1933, 1934, he was a member of an SS riding group in Berlin. But Nationalist Socialist organizations were then pressing non-member students to participate in paramilitary activities. In 1937, he was the technical director at age 25 of the new Army Rocket Center in Peenemünde on the Baltic. He received a letter asking him to join the party. And it didn't require like a lot of commitment, and it might damage his career by saying no. He kind of went along. So there is some truth to this. He was not like, Rudolf Hess or, Heinrich Himmler. So in spring of 1940, an SS man approached him with an invitation from Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler to rejoin the SS as an officer. He asked his military superior, Walter Dornberger, who advised him that it was politically inconvenient for the missile program if he turned it down. So, lacking any convictions that would make him say no, von Braun once again went along, although he probably could have made excuses to get out of it. So he did have opportunities to just be like, I'm just a scientist. I don't want to do that.
He just went in with it.
But he wanted money to keep coming in.
Yeah.
So by 1943, he had ascended to the rank of Sturmbannführer, a major, thanks to Himmler's appreciation for his rocket work, his deadly rockets. In October 1942, the V-2 made its first successful flight. Hitler, motivated by a worsening war situation, soon approved production despite the missile's technological immaturity. Problem was where to get the labor. Yeah, where do we, when the
I wonder where they looked.
Yeah, where do we get the labor when the Eastern Front's
What's free?
insatiable demands made German manpower scarce? As elsewhere in the war economy, the answer was the brutal exploitation of foreign workers and concentration camp inmates. Just gross.
Yeah.
So in parallel, prisoners were brought to two potential V-2 factory sites, and then there were air raids. Hitler and Himmler decided to concentrate manufacturing in an underground plant, leading to the founding of the Middle Work and the Dora Camp. Von Braun had been out of the decision-making chain about camp laborers, but the new situation put him in direct contact with them. I mean, he had to admit all this in the West German court.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was a Nazi.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the way it goes.
Got to acknowledge it.
Yeah, it's something to acknowledge, and it's not the happiest story. So, but we have other happy stories.
That we do.
Yeah, of course.
More successes.
Yeah, more successes. So I think let's take a quick break.
Okay.
We'll come back, and then we will wrap things up for our live stream.
Sounds good.
Okay?
All
All right, here we go. everyone. Welcome back to STEAM Lab, Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics. And I think it's time for the news with Kyle.
This is a different theme.
Sure.
This week in science history. In 1965, the Mariner 4 satellite sent a transmission of the first close-up photograph of Mars. In 1954, the first commercial jet transport airplane built in the U.S., the Boeing 707 prototype, the Model 36780, made its maiden flight from Renton Field, south of Seattle, Washington. On July 16th, 1969, the crew of Apollo 11, Neil A. Armstrong, Edwin E. Aldrin Jr., and Michael Collins blasted off from Cape Kennedy on the first manned mission to the surface of the moon. In 1986, videotapes taken by the deep-sea Alvin submersible showing Titanic's remains were released. And as we were saying, in July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 astronauts became the first men to walk on the moon. And finally, in 1982, the first look at the 3 Mile Island Unit 2 partial core meltdown was recorded by a mini TV camera. And this has been This Week in Science History.
Excellent. There you go, man.
We're getting there.
Nicely done. I like that. That was super cool, man.
Cool. Try to get my not Tom Brooks. Whatever. What's the guy? What am I thinking of? The guy with the mustache.
That would be Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite.
Yes,
Yeah,
that would be Walter Cronkite. So I had a side story that doesn't really have much to do with.
You had 4 minutes for our live stream.
Let just turn the music back up. I have something from StoryCorps. It's called Eyes on the Stars, and I think it's the best way to end this episode on YouTube Live.
All right.
When he was 9 years old, Ron, without my parents or myself knowing his whereabouts, decided to take a mile walk from our home down to the library, which was, of course, public library, but not so public for black folks when you're talking about 1959. So as he was walking in there, all these folks were staring at him because they were white folk only, and they were looking at him and said, who's this Negro? So he politely positioned himself in line to check out his books. Well, this old librarian, she says, this library is not for coloreds. He said, well, I would like to check out these books. She says, young man, if you don't leave this library right now, I'm going to call the police. So he just propped himself up on the counter and sat there and said, I'll wait. So she called the police and subsequently called my mother. Police came down, 2 burly guys come in and say, well, where's the disturbance? And she pointed to the little 9-year-old boy sitting up on the counter. He says, man, what's the problem? So my mother, in the meanwhile, she was called. She comes down there praying the whole way there. Lord Jesus, please don't let them put my child in jail. And my mother asked the librarian, what's the problem? Well, he wanted to check out the books. And your son shouldn't be down here. And the police officer said, why don't you just give the kid the books? And my mother said, he'll take good care of them. And reluctantly, the librarian gave Ron the books. And my mother said, what did you say? He said, thank you, ma'am. Later on, as youngsters, a show came on TV called Star Trek. Now, Star Trek showed the future where there were black folk and white folk working together. Right. And I looked at it as science fiction because that wasn't going to happen, really. But Ronald saw it as science possibility. Mm-hmm. He came up during a time when there was Neil Armstrong and all of those guys. So how was a colored boy from South Carolina wearing glasses, never flew a plane, how was he going to become an astronaut? But Ron was the one who didn't accept societal norms as being his norm. I mean, that was for other people. And he got to be aboard his own Starship Enterprise.
So that's the story of Ron McNair, and the library in Lake City was renamed the Dr. Ronald E. McNair Life History Center on January 28, 2011, 25 years to the day after his death. And those of you who don't know Ron McNair, he was one of the Challenger 7. And that's his cool story. And
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to end the live stream.
I like that.
Right now. We're not going to end the show completely, but I think that's probably the best place to end the live stream. So what's more to be said? Reach the end of another episode of Steam Lab on YouTube Live. You can connect with us on Facebook, facebook.com/SteamLabVT. And we'll see you next week. Hopefully, I don't know what we're going to do.
We'll talk about something.
Maybe we'll do an art episode with Connor.
Maybe we will.
And we'll see you next time in the Challenge Zone.